Now we're live.
We're live.
All right. We got millions of people watching us right now.
How many million?
6 million. I guess maybe if we hit a threshold, a full class, I'll start getting into the nitty gritty.
We have our first viewer.
Hello, first viewer. Congratulations for being the first
ever
person to watch the first ever
B&B TV.
B&B TV. Welcome. Once people have accumulated, or in maybe 4 or 5 minutes, we'll get started with the clinic. I hope you're all comfy and cozy and safe in your homes. Get a nice cup of tea or
Glass of milk.
Some hot chocolate,
Coffee.
maybe grab your bicycle, bring it nice and close.
Right to the couch, yeah.
Your bicycle needs as much love as all of the friends and family in your life right now. So hopefully with some information that we'll be disseminating during this time over the internet, it will be easier to build a more intimate relationship with your trusty steed. And if you are for some reason watching this video and don't own a bicycle, we are still selling bikes to the best of our abilities.
Where is that located?
Where is our shop located?
On the internet.
On the internet, if you go to bikesnotbombs.org, we have a bike shop page, and from that page we have a link to our brand new online store, which features both products that we have here in the shop as well as bicycles. We are currently in the process of uploading all of our refurbished and new bikes onto our website so that you can purchase them online. You can pay for it online, and then we can facilitate you to come into the shop and pick up your items without having to interact with us more than necessary or come into the retail shop.
Well, we've got 7-8 viewers.
78?
7 to 8.
8,000.
And Gene Goodman says hi.
Hi, Mom.
Could someone bring their bike in for repair to the shop?
If you have a bicycle and you would like to have it repaired, hopefully by the end of this free clinic, you will at least have some understanding of how to fix a flat tire, and we will continue doing more lessons on a weekly basis. But if there is something more serious going on with your bike, or if you don't have the tools required to fix it, you are more than welcome to schedule an appointment to drop off your bike here at our location. We have a contactless system where you can come by, fill out a form with what is the issue with your bike and your name and contact information, leave your bike in our storage location. We will then bring your bike inside, do an evaluation, and then contact you with a cost estimate for the repair and a time frame for when we can complete the work on your bike, and then schedule a time for you to come by, pay for it, and pick it up. So that is more or less the process. We are figuring all of the logistics out, just as I'm sure all of you are, and so we thank you for all of your patience and understanding. But we are open for business and accepting repairs. So if you are in need of getting some service done on your bike, please, you can call us, or you can shoot an email to shop@bikesnotbombs.org. Our website is bikesnotbombs.org, and we have tons of information there, and we are in the process of uploading more every single day. More products to our e-commerce site, more up-to-date information to our website. So definitely keep an eye out for that. How many people we got?
We have 7. I think we can get into it.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, to you lucky folks who are tuned in right now, thank you so much for joining us. This is our first ever attempt at doing a virtual clinic. So I hope it is informative and fun for all of you. We hope to continue doing this as much as possible going into the future to help educate all of you and give you the power of knowledge and hopefully spark some joy in your life as much as bicycles make me happy. By the way, if you don't already know, not too long ago we posted the agenda for this course, which hopefully will run less than an hour, probably less than that. If you'd like to follow along, I have the schedule here of all of the things that I'm going to cover. Also, for those of you, if you are joining late, or if I'm going too fast, I'll try to keep the tempo at a good place, but we will be saving this video and cataloging it so that you can always come back and rewatch the video, and we will have these resources posted on all of our platforms so that you can reference this video again in the future. So, just a quick introduction. My name is Ben. I've been a Bikes Not Bombs student, a youth apprentice, bicycle mechanic for a long time since I was in high school, and Bikes Not Bombs has really done a lot for me personally and a lot for our community. We are a nonprofit organization, and we really appreciate all of the support that you all can give to us, and we're really happy to support our mission by giving free bicycle education to all of you to empower you all as we use the bicycle as a vehicle for social change. And so the way this course is going to work is I'm going to quickly give you an overview of all of the names of all of the parts and identification of the different components that are involved when you're doing a flat fix on your bike. I will talk about all of the tools in just a second, go through all of that, quickly do an overview of the different parts of a wheel and understanding the difference between a tire, an inner tube, a wheel, all of those different things so that you understand the vernacular. And then we will go into some general information about what causes flats, different types of flats, things like that. And then finally, we'll end with a step-by-step process of how to fix a flat tire if you were to have one on your bike. So, with no further ado, I will begin by talking about the bicycle wheel. The wheel is a large portion of your bike. You, under most circumstances, will have two of them. And using the correct terminology when you are working with parts of the wheel is incredibly valuable because when you walk into a bike shop, it's really good to know what you are working on and what you need to be repaired so that there's no confusion between yourself and the bike mechanic. So to give you a quick overview, this in its entirety is the wheel. What that includes is the tire. You have the rim of the wheel, which is this piece that goes all the way around the circumference. Connecting the rim are the spokes, which go around the wheel. Some of you might have wheels with more spokes, some of you might have wheels with fewer spokes. It all kind of depends on what kind of bike you have, what kind of wheel you have. And then in the center of the wheel, holding it all together, you have the hub. And the hub is a bearing system that allows your wheel to spin. Without a hub, you would not be able to ride the bike. And so the actual parts of the hub itself is something we'll save for another class if we get into rotational systems. But just understanding that the system as a whole, when it comes all together, is your wheel, and then the individual components are the tire, the rim, the spokes, and then you have the hub in the middle. On your rear wheel, the main difference is that you have your gear cluster attached to the wheel. Some of you may have single speeds, some of you may have freewheels, some of you may have cassettes. In the case of repairing a flat tire, it's not absolutely crucial that you are able to identify the difference between a freewheel and cassette, but just know that your front wheel is going to look like this: rim, spokes, hub, and then the back wheel. The main difference is that you have your gear cluster here on the back. All right, so that's that. Tires. Tires are absolutely important to understand when you are fixing a flat. Tires come in all different shapes and sizes. We could do an entire class just on how to choose the type of tire that's right for your bike, whether it's a narrow tire, whether it's a big wide knobby tire, whether it's a hybrid tire, something kind of in the middle. So if any of you are interested or curious about choosing parts and accessories for your bike, please give us a comment, send us emails. We'd love to get your feedback if that's something you all are interested in learning more about. But just knowing that the tire is the point of contact for the road. It's something that takes quite a bit of wear and tear. The tire itself is made up of the tread, which is the section of the tire that actually contacts the road. This is the part of the tire that's going to get worn out the most, all of the friction from riding on the pavement or whatever terrain you're riding on. You have the sidewall of the tire. This is an older tire that was donated to us. This particular tire is made out of a particular material that is notorious for getting dry and cracked, particularly when it's exposed for a while to UV light. So that is certainly something when you're fixing a flat tire, it's important to evaluate the condition of your tire and to make sure that there aren't any seams that are torn or any significant gashes or anything like this, where you can see that the tire has become brittle from drying out in the sun. And so sometimes when you're fixing a flat tire, typically you're repairing a puncture or some sort of situation with the inner tube, which is a separate thing we'll talk about in just a moment. But it's also crucial to understand that the cause of your flat may be coming from some failure on the tire itself. So good to identify that. So as I mentioned just before, the parts of the tire, you have the tread, you have the sidewall, you have the inner lining, which goes all the way around here. Different tires come in different thicknesses. Now I have some cross sections I'll show in just a moment. The final section of your tire that's worth understanding is the bead, which is inside the tire, so you can't actually see it unless you were to cut this open. But the bead runs the full circumference of the tire. They're usually a wire, some sort of metal wire bead. Some are rigid, like this one, and then some are folding. Some of you may have tires that fold up. The main advantage there is really just that they're a little bit lighter weight, a little bit easier to transport. But either way, you'll have a bead. The bead is what actually hooks the tire onto the rim and keeps it secure when the tire is inflated with air. And when we're doing the flat fix, we'll go over that some more. One last thing that I'll show on the tires, we have this awesome display piece here that shows some cross sections of the tire. You can see this is the bead inside of the tire. You have the tread is here on top. You have the inner lining of the tire, and then these are all tires made by the company Schwalbe, which we do sell here. Schwalbe makes a really great commuter tire, and you can see the different thicknesses of tire. The thicker tires are going to have more resistance to being punctured. So that's something to keep in mind. Typically, these tires are going to be a little bit heavier because there's more material there, but they also prevent punctures a little bit better. So that's something else to keep in mind. Tires come in different thicknesses, both on the sidewall as well as the tread itself. So those are tires. And like I said, if I'm going too fast or if you have any questions about any things in particular. Yes, in the studio audience.
Yeah, so if I left my bike out all winter, let's say, so you
Mhm.
said the sidewall could dry rot in the sun, is it possible that like over the winter a tire could get cracked or hard or...
Yeah, it's certainly possible. All sorts of weather conditions can affect your tires. Where you store your tire, especially, or where you store your bike, it's important if you're not going to ride your bike in the winter or any period of time, storing it is important, not just from UV light, but temperature can affect that as well, any sort of moisture. So it's good to be cognizant of where you're leaving your parts. It's much easier to do it right the first time, store your bike in a dry location, somewhere where it's not exposed to too much sunlight. It's much easier to do that than to have to replace your tires or replace something down the road because you left your bike outside in the rain or anything like that. So definitely good to be aware of.
Cool.
One more thing we'll talk about in the parts section, just reviewing my schedule here, are the inner tubes. Crucial part of the flat fixing process is understanding your inner tubes. Inner tubes are not quite as diverse as tires are in terms of their types, but it is absolutely necessary to understand the relationship between the inner tube and the tire and to identify the size. So both tubes and tires primarily are determined by two dimensions. You have the width of the tire, and then the corresponding width of the inner tube should match. Inner tubes, because they are made out of rubber and they're elastic, will expand and contrast. And so that means when you purchase a tube, it will come in a box like this, and it will always give you a size range. So if you have a tire, for example, that the dimensions are 700 by 25, 700 meaning the diameter of the tire, and then 25 meaning the width of the tire, and those are in millimeters. Your inner tube is going to come in a range. So if your tire is a 25 millimeter width tire, the tube may be 700 by 23 all the way to 700 by 28. It's going to be a range. So as long as your tire size lands somewhere in that range of sizes for tubes, you should be golden. You definitely want to avoid using a tube that's too wide or a tube that's too narrow. If it's really an emergency and you need a tube that's a little bit too narrow, that you might be able to get away with it. If your tube is way too wide, you're very likely when you're installing the tire for it to get pinched up, and it's not going to fill out the form of the tire the way it should, and that can definitely cause a flat if that's the case. So it's really good to understand the dimensions of that. Bicycle tire sizing can get very confusing, and I don't have enough time to lecture on and on about it just now. We can do an entire class on just tire sizes if people are at all confused or have more questions about that. But I would say if you are purchasing a bike tube at a bike shop, it's always good to bring the tire with you or take a picture of the sidewall of the tire. Hopefully, maybe I can find one. Yep, so you can see right here, printed on the side of the tire, this is 27.5, which is referring to the diameter, by 2.20. So again, tire sizes can get very, very confusing very quickly. 2.20 is actually the empirical measurement. Those are 2.2 inches. So bicycles like to go back and forth between metric and imperial, so that can get confusing. But as long as you either take a picture of this or bring the bike with you, or at least the tire with you to the bike shop, your friendly local mechanics can certainly help you identify, make sure that you're buying the right size. Yes.
We did get a question come in from the chat. Do inner tubes have a best used by date?
That is a great question. So because at Bikes Not Bombs, we get donated parts. Sometimes people donate old bike tubes that are still in their original packaging, so basically new old stock from sometimes the 70s and 80s. And I have successfully installed tubes that were that old. More specifically, I have never seen a bicycle tube where on the packaging there was a date, an expiration date. Rubber can deteriorate like other objects, particularly the things like UV light, moisture, things like that can damage the tubes. But I've successfully used pretty old tubes. One thing to be careful is if you find a old tube in your basement and you see that it's covered in repair patches, you might want to avoid using that tube and just splurge for a brand new one.
I know that friction sometimes is very bad for the tube, so you can put them in plastic bags too to avoid some of that.
Definitely, yeah. So my example was still in the original packaging, but it certainly can't hurt to store your tubes in plastic. But yeah, if it's a 5-year-old tube, 10-year-old tube, and it's brand new, never been used, chances are it should work fine. Okay, moving on. Let's see. Okay, cool. All right, so let's talk about the tools that you will need in order to fix a flat tire on your bike, and also particularly because getting a flat tire is one of the most common types of mechanical issues that you can experience. Having these tools around the house, just in general, is never a bad idea. And all of the tools that I'm about to show you and talk about, we sell here at Bikes Not Bombs. So I would say most importantly, you're going to need tire levers. Tire levers are used to get leverage underneath the bead of the tire, like I mentioned before, in order to pull the tire up off of the rim of the wheel so that you can remove the inner tube. Tire levers come different brands, make different shapes and sizes. You can, whatever you have access to, I definitely encourage everyone to use an official tire lever designed for removing tires. I have witnessed people using eating utensils and all manner of things to remove their tire from the rim. I would encourage you to avoid doing that because you may damage the tire, you may unnecessarily puncture the rim, or the inner tube, you may damage the rim. So these are made out of plastic, they won't scratch things up too badly. They basically just have a little scoopy on them, and these allow you to safely and efficiently remove the tire from your rim. Myself personally, I prefer the Pedro's tire levers because they're a pretty robust piece of plastic. They snap together like this. We sell them in sets of 2, and in just a moment I'll explain why using 2 is ideal. And they're a bit wider. They give you a little bit more surface area. These ones are pretty common. You'll see them in a lot of shops. They come in a little sleeve, and they come in a pack of 3, and they're fine. But sometimes with really unresponsive tires, I've been in situations where I've snapped these in half because they're just a little bit flimsier. So whatever you prefer, I really like these Pedro's ones. They come in fun colors. And you are also going to have something, this isn't absolutely necessary, this is something we have here at the shop. This is a tire jack. This gives you a little bit extra leverage when you're reinstalling the tire, which if you yourself have ever attempted to do a flat fix on your own, you may have noticed that the tire was just such a pain to get back on the rim, especially certain brands and certain sizes of tires are harder than others. And so the tire jack allows you to reinstall the tire a little bit more easily. When I'm demonstrating the process of repairing it, I'll show you in practice how to use this. But you don't always need this, and if you can avoid it, you should. The number one thing not to do is don't use the tire lever at the end when you're reinstalling the tire, because you may pinch the tire lever between the inner tube and the bead of the tire and cause a new flat when you had just fixed the old one. So if you have to, you can use the tire jack. And again, I'll show you this in just a moment. All right, and then to wrap up our tools portion, you have a patch kit, which we will go through everything that comes inside of this in just a moment. But having a patch kit is really helpful. It's really great if you're riding on a long ride where you know you're going somewhere far away. You might not be near a bike shop to easily get a flat fix, and you have a saddle bag or you have a backpack. Having a patch kit in your kit of gear is really awesome. Tire levers as well. And then it just occurred to me that I should also mention having a pump is essential. You're going to need to put air back in your inner tube when this is all said and done. And pumps, there's all different types of pumps. This is a floor pump to be used at home. You can also buy smaller portable pumps that you can bring with you. Again, if you are in need of those, here at our bike shop, we have a public pump that you can use that we will sanitize for you. And so you can come here and borrow our pump if you need it, but we do also sell pumps. I highly encourage getting a pump, having one at home, and getting one that has a pressure gauge on it so that you know exactly how much pressure to inflate your inner tube. And I will also discuss how much pressure that should be when we go through the process of doing it. All right.
We did get a comment, but I don't know if we want to circle to it when we're fixing the flat. They asked about the valve of the inner tube.
Yes, you just read my mind, question asker. That is fantastic. I will discuss that right now, super quick. So, with the inner tubes, you have pretty much, in your experience, will only encounter two types of valves. There are other types. If you have a bike that has one of those types, we'll email me. We'll talk about it. But for the purposes of this class, we'll talk about the two main types, which are the Presta valve and the Schrader valve. So, Schrader is going to be this kind, aka the American valve, aka the one that you're probably more familiar with. Car tires are going to have Schrader valves. Schrader valves are most commonly used on older bikes, especially lower end bikes, but sometimes higher end bikes, or hybrid bikes or mountain bikes. The cousin to the Schrader valve, this one, is the Presta valve. This one. There's some obvious aesthetic differences between the two. Functionally, they're similar. They both take air in and release air virtually the same way. Both of them have a plastic cap, which is mostly to protect the ends of the valve. If you, for whatever reason, lose this cap, it will not affect your valve's ability to retain air. So if this comes off, air will not flow. It's mostly to protect the end of the cap, and also it makes it look a little bit tidier. But don't be concerned if you lose this. If you do lose it, come in. We have boxes and boxes and boxes of extra ones of these that we'd be happy to give you at no charge. So in the Schrader valve, inside the core of the valve, if you can see it, hopefully, there's a pin right in the middle. And so air will not flow unless that pin is pressed in. This is a brand new tube. There's no air in it anyway right now. So if I pressed it in, nothing would happen. If you need to release air from your tube, either because you overinflated it or for whatever reason, you can always take the end of a ballpoint pen or a screwdriver or whatever will fit and press it in, air will come out. So that's the Schrader. The Presta valve also has a cap. It's just a different shape, but it functionally is the same thing. The pin on the Presta valve is on the outside. You can see it here. functionally, this is the same pin that you have on the Schrader valve, it's just exposed. So I would argue that it's more important to keep track of this cap for the sake of protecting this pin. It's a little bit more fragile for the reason that it's exposed. You also have this little lock ring here. This threads in and presses the valve close against the rim, and I'll show you that in action when we work on the wheel. That's good to help prevent the valve from being pulled from side to side, especially when you're putting the nozzle of the pump on it. It is really easy to tweak the valve from side to side. This helps from that moving around a little bit. So with the Schrader valve, all it takes is putting the nozzle of the pump on and start inflating it. The nozzle of the pump will engage that pin and push it in and allow air to flow. What's crucial to understand about the Presta valve is that you have to release this gasket or else the pin will not move. Right now it's in a locked position, so if I push on it, nothing will happen. You have to release this gasket, and now you can see it's moving around, and now air will flow. So I do that to inflate it, and then you want to make sure to remember to lock it down again when you are ready to put it back on. So in a nutshell, those are valves. If you were someone who has a Dunlap valve, that's another kind, but that's a story for another day. And they're very rare. They're mostly on older bikes. Okay, so one more thing I'd like to discuss very quickly, just a minute or two, before I remove the wheel and go through the process of fixing the flat, are the types of flats that you might get, and that will help us transition into the evaluation process of the procedure for fixing the flat on your bike. So the three main types of flats, which are important to understand so that you know how to address the issue, are punctures, pinch flats, and blowouts. A puncture, pretty self-explanatory. If some foreign body, like a nail, a piece of glass, a staple, ends up puncturing through your tire, through the tread of your tire, or through the sidewall, and it penetrates the inner tube and then is released, air will come out of that hole. Pretty straightforward. It's really important to understand if you have a if you have a puncture, and I'll show you how to identify that from the hole, because it means you need to be really cognizant of trying to find whatever object it was that punctured your inner tube. If that piece of glass or that nail or whatever is still sticking through your tire, you're going to have to make sure to remove that before reinstalling the new tube or patching the old tube. Otherwise, you're just going to keep getting flats over and over again, which I see all the time. Even if you have identified that you probably have a different kind of flat, it's still always good to check the tire, run through everything, and just really make sure that there's no glass. Sometimes you have a pinch flat, but there's also a piece of glass at the same time that's just barely sticking through that hasn't done any damage yet, but you're going to want to remove that regardless. So pinch flats, I think in my experience fixing flat tires for many years, pinch flats are super common. Almost always a pinch flat is caused by not inflating your inner tube enough. Imagine that your tire is rated to be at 80 pounds of pressure, 80 psi. If you're riding it at 40, 50 psi, what'll happen is even from just a slight impact, even if you roll off a curb that's 2 inches high, or you hit a little pothole or something, sometimes even just getting on your bike, if the inner tube isn't firm enough to hold its shape because it's low on air, that may cause the inner tube to get pinched because of that impact between the rim and the bead of the tire. It'll get pinched in one spot, and then it'll pop on either side of that pinch, and that'll cause what's called a snake bite. So you'll identify that by pulling out the tube, and you'll see that there's two holes side by side. And that almost always means, unless there's a staple or something fork-shaped that penetrated your inner tube, almost always if you have a snake bite, it means that you have a pinch flat. and you've learned a valuable lesson about making sure that you inflate your tires regularly. Your inner tubes are technically porous. They are not 100% vacuum tight. What that means is that if you inflate your tubes to the maximum pressure, even give or say, maybe a week later, your inner tubes may be 10, 15, 20 psi lower than they were when you inflated it a week prior. So it's a really, really good thing to get in the habit of putting more air into your tubes periodically. If you've ever pulled your bike out of a basement that had been stored for several months, 99% of the time, no air will be in either tire. And it doesn't mean that you have a puncture, it doesn't mean anything's wrong, you just have to re-inflate your tires. And then the final, also one that's pretty straightforward, is a blowout. That can be caused by a gash in the sidewall or your tread of your tire that allows the tube to poke through and explode. It can come from overinflating your inner tube if you go way above the recommended PSI level. Something that can happen, it's not super common, but if you're riding on hot asphalt and it's 100 degrees outside, the inner tube, the pressure is going to expand, and that may cause a blowout. So if it's a really scorching hot day, maybe put your tire pressure just a little bit lower, but that doesn't happen all the time. All right, so that is a ton of information all at once. I hope that was helpful for all of you for the beginning portion of this. Like I said before, and I'll mention this again, this video will be archived. You can always go back and review tubes, parts, names of the tire, names of the wheel, tools, all that stuff. And also, again, any questions. After all of this, I'm gonna do now the procedure step by step of fixing the flat tire, and then at the end, hopefully, if we have time, we can do a Q&A, and I'll answer some more questions. I can also answer questions about the shop and how we're all doing, and whatever else people are curious about. All right. So, without further ado, let's get into it. So, I have here a bicycle. This is a bike that was donated to the organization that is about to begin the process of being refurbished. So look forward to hopefully seeing this bike on our online store at some point in the near future once it's finished being refurbished. So I am having an unlucky day, and I have been riding and I have a flat tire. Oh no. All right. But thank goodness that weird guy from Bikes Not Bombs did that cool, awesome clinic that everybody loved and was so successful. And I remember everything he said, and so I feel capable to fix it myself. So the first thing you're going to do is cry, and then get up, wipe yourself off, and begin the process of removing the wheel from your bicycle. The process of fixing a flat tire on your bike is not dissimilar from fixing anything on your bike. And so if you understand the core process of doing a repair on your bike, beginning with a flat tire, it'll give you the framework for understanding how to fix anything on your bike. We have another studio audience question.
Do I need a bike stand to fix a flat tire?
Great, that is a fantastic question, sir. I don't know. So it is incredibly valuable to have a bike stand. As you can see, I am in a professional bike shop, so I have access to one. If you do not have a bike stand, that is perfectly reasonable. You can also flip your bike upside down. So I will demonstrate that really quickly, and then I'll move on. So the reason why you want to flip your bike over is because if I were to remove the wheel and then put the bike down on the ground, what will happen is the back end of the bike will not be supported by the wheel and by the tire, which is designed to be contacting the ground. The back of the bike will end up resting on this part here, which is called the derailleur. And so by doing that, you may cause some damage to your derailleur if you were to remove the wheel and put it flat on the ground like that. If you want, you can remove the wheel and put the bike down on the ground like this. But I would argue that the easiest way to go about doing this is to flip the bike upside down. If you have a fancy Brooks saddle or a leather saddle, maybe put a rag or something down on the floor if you don't want it to get dirty. Same thing with your grips. But flip the bike over, and now it's stable, and I can work on it. I can remove the wheel. So if you're working from home in a garage or in your bedroom or whatever, that's totally reasonable. If you are someone who has a stand in your own home, that also helps. Super quick stand etiquette 101 is it's a great idea to put the bike in the stand so that the drivetrain, the side of the bike that has all the gears on it, is facing you. That means if you do any repair on the bike that involves the gears, those gears will be facing towards you, and that'll allow you to work on them more easily rather than having them on this side and having to lean over the bike. You may also notice that at first I was attempting to clamp, to tighten down the clamp on the frame. That's okay, but ideally if you're going to clamp the bike down, you want to clamp the seat post. Usually it's not going to be as valuable as your frame. It's also going to be usually made out of aluminum or maybe steel, and so it can take a little bit more clamp force. So just a good general practice, if you can, clamp the bike to the seat post, not the seat tube of the frame, and definitely not anywhere else. Okay, so removing the wheel from the frame is often the part that both literally and figuratively hangs people up quite often. There's something that you can do to make it much easier for you, particularly with the rear wheel, which I'm purposefully doing for this demonstration. With the front wheel, the wheel comes off much more easily. But when you're removing this, you want to, right now you can see that the chain is in the middle of the gear cluster on the back. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to shift into my highest gear, which is also the gear that is furthest away from the bike. So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to pedal. It's crucial that you pedal while you're shifting. If you don't pedal, nothing will happen. So I'm going to pedal all the way down into the highest gear, which is also the smallest cog. What I've just done is I've put the derailleur, this piece here that moves the chain back and forth, into its most relaxed position. And it means the most slack on my chain. So that is going to give me the least amount of pull and the least amount of resistance when I'm trying to take the wheel out of the frame. If you were not to do that, it's going to be really hard. You might find that you're trying to remove the wheel and the chain gets really tight because it's being caught up, the system's being caught up. So that's a really great thing to do. The second place where you might get caught up on when you're removing the wheel is the brakes. In this case, there's no air in the tire and the brakes aren't super tight, but oftentimes the brake pads are closer to the rim than the width of the tire. And so what that means is if you have a flat, it's not that big a deal because the tire will squish and it'll come out. But if there's air in the tire and you need to remove the wheel, most brakes, and there's tons of different types, but most brakes will have some way to be disengaged. These are cantilever brakes, and these brakes can be disengaged by pulling this anchor out of the side. So the anchor comes out and then the brakes flip open. That's specifically designed to allow you to remove the wheel from the frame without the tire getting stuck on the brake pads. So it's important to shift your chain into the highest gear, aka the gear that is furthest to the outside or the smallest cog, and then also disengage your brakes if necessary to allow you to get the tire past the brake pads. All right, so this bike has a quick release system, which is what keeps tension on the wheel to the frame so that they stay together. Some of you might have a bolt-on, which requires a 15 millimeter wrench, which is something I haven't talked about yet, but basically just a 15 millimeter wrench if it's a kid's bike or a BMX bike or maybe a weird old bike, it might not be a 15, but 9 times out of 10, it's going to be your 15 millimeter wrench, especially if you have a single speed bike. You're almost always going to have bolts on the wheel, and those will almost always take a 15. One other thing is, for those of you at home who have old 3-speed bikes, or you have a kid's bike, or you have a bike that has a chain guard, there may be one extra thing that you will have to remember to remove for the wheel to come out. So if you open up the brakes, if you shift your chain and the wheel's still coming out and you're frustrated because Ben didn't say anything about anything else, I'm telling you now that if it's a 3-speed, there might be a special chain that you have to disengage. If it's a kid's bike, sometimes kids' bikes will have what we call lawyer tabs, which are a little extra piece of metal right next to the bolts that actually hook into the frame, so that you have to remove the bolts and then you also have to remove the lawyer tabs that essentially prevent, if you forget or neglect to tighten your bolts, it's one extra layer of defense to help keep the wheel from just falling off the bike. So it's good to just observe everything. If the wheel's not coming out and you're frustrated, take a deep breath. Maybe you have one of those extra things, and feel free to always, you can email the shop or look up on YouTube, why is my wheel not coming out? But if you do all of those things, you should be able to very easily move the wheel, which I will do right now. I'm going to push the derailleur out of the way, and there we go. No fuss, it just pops right out. All right, moving right along. I'm going to start with the valve, and I'm just going to make sure that all the air is completely out. If you have a flat tire, there might be some air that's just kind of in there still, even though it's totally flat. You should still be able to hear there's just a little bit of air still in there. So I'm just going to make sure there's no air at all whatsoever. If hopefully you remember, this is the Presta valve for this bike. Here is that lock ring that I was mentioning before, twisted firmly, not too tight, but firmly enough so that the valve doesn't move around too much. It's snug against the rim. So I won't be able to pull the tube out unless I do that. So I'm gonna and by do that, I should explain, remove the lock ring. The gasket here, the locking gasket, is also unthreaded all the way. Here's a pro tip, something that you might notice, or maybe you didn't notice, but I'll explain, is that the label of the tire, the brand, the manufacturer, whatever, the model, is printed right here. And that printed label is where the valve is. That's a nifty thing that mechanics will do, and it helps you remember where the valve is. So if you're working on the bike and it's all spinning around, it's super easy to quickly be like, "Yep, the valve is where that label is." So you don't have to do that, but it's a nice little trick to help you always find it quickly. Something else is that if you find a hole in your tube, let's say the hole is down here somewhere, you can then, if you know where the hole on the inner tube is, once you pulled it out, you can then reference where that hole would line up with the tire, because you have this reference point here where the decal is lined up with the valve. So if you're looking for glass or whatever, a nail or whatever, you should check the whole tire. But if you find a hole and it's down here, you can know to check the side that's opposite from here, because that's where it would line up when it was all together. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to start disassembling the system. We've begun that. The first thing we did was evaluate. And evaluation basically just means that we identified that we have a flat tire, something needs to be fixed. So the evaluation stage, when I was mentioning earlier, the general processes for evaluating a problem on your bike and working through a problem on your bike, the evaluation phase might seem obvious, but it's always the first thing to do is to identify what the problem is so that you know exactly how to address that problem. So the first thing we do is evaluate, understand that we have a flat tire, that the issue is not, whatever else it is. Then comes the disassembly. So with anything, almost always you're going to have to disassemble some system, whether that's a cable system, a rotational system on your bike, or in this case, it's the inner tube system that we have to disassemble. So that begins by removing the wheel from the frame, and then we're going to have to remove the tire from the rim, and then remove the inner tube. So in order to do that, you'll need your handy dandy tire lever. Typically, the bead of the tire is going to be tightest against the rim where the valve is located. That's a usual sort of rule of thumb. And so I recommend, to make life easier for you, you should remove the tire on the side that is opposite from where the valve stem is. So I'm going to turn the wheel 180, and then I am going to install my tire lever between the edge of the rim here and underneath the bead in order to pull that off. Now, if you remember, as I mentioned before, you buy tire levers in sets of 2 or 3. The reason you do that is because if you only use one tire lever, what that forces you to do is you get to this point, but you need to pull the bead off all the way around. And so you might be compelled to then push the tire lever or slide it across so that it pulls up the bead as you go along. You can do that and be successful in removing the tire, but what that does is the plastic tire lever is going to pull material off of the rubber where the bead is. So to avoid doing that as much as possible, what you want to do is you want to position your first tire lever and then position the second tire lever just a few inches away, flip them both down, and then you can see here on these pageless levers, they have a little hook. One of them can stay hooked to your rim and stay in place, while the other one can work around. This is going to allow you to more effectively work the bead off of the rim, and it also means that as you're working this way, the tire doesn't work itself back on and undo the work as you're going around. So that's going to keep the tire off of the rim and allow you to more effectively remove the bead. So what I'm going to do, again, instead of sliding it, I'm going to hold this just in case so it doesn't fall out, and then I'm going to push that in. So this tire is not giving me very much resistance, so this isn't going to be a big challenge. You can actually see this already came out, but that's okay, because once you get an eighth or a quarter of the bead off, you're pretty much already almost there. But if this tire was being a bit fussier with me, what I would want to do is I would want to leverage, slide a little bit, leverage, slide a little bit, leverage, and work my way around that way, rather than trying to force it all the way around and risk damaging the tire. Because if you don't know, these gator skins are pretty pricey tires, so it's in my best interest not to damage the tire unnecessarily. But I'm getting so little resistance that it's allowing me to just go right at it. And so that's perfectly fine. There we go. So at this point, one side of the tire has been removed, but the other side of the tire is still installed. At this point, you can actually stop. If you don't want to pull the tire all the way off the bike or all the way off the wheel, you don't have to. If you are looking for a piece of glass and you really want to inspect that tire, if you want to even stick the tire in water and wipe it down and really make sure the tire is in good shape, by all means remove the tire all the way off. But for the sake of this demonstration, I'm actually going to leave the tire on because I can still remove the inner tube without doing anything else to the tire. So again, I'm going to start on the opposite side of where the valve is, over here, and I'm just going to reach in and the inner tube is going to pull right out. So I'm going to work that all the way around, bring that out here, come back to the beginning, and then pull the valve out, and now I have my inner tube. You can see here, inside the rim, you have a rim strip. It's good to make sure that that rim strip is not damaged. Rim strips are either going to be rubber or plastic, or if it's a higher end one, it might be made out of some sort of cloth. The rim strip is what that does. Hopefully you can see here, this is the hole where the spoke and the spoke nipple comes up through the bottom of the rim, and there's a hole there. If you didn't have the rim strip, when the inner tube is inflated, the inner tube might get forced into those holes and become scratched and potentially punctured if you neglect to use a rim strip. So any wheel that is going to have an inner tube is going to use a rim strip. So if you have a rubber rim strip over time from friction, wear and tear, whatever, those rim strips may become torn, and it's important to replace that if it is damaged, because that can cause flats even if your tube is repaired. So that's a good thing to know. And you can see the valve hole here. The diameter of the valve hole is specific to the size of the valve. So if you have a Presta, a Schrader is not going to fit in there. So it's important, if you decide you don't like Presta and you want to switch to Schrader, you're not going to be able to do that with this rim. If you have a rim that's designed to take a Schrader, but you have a Presta, you can get an adapter that makes that diameter smaller to fit the Schrader valve. So that is something you can do. But I recommend, if you're going to experiment with valve types, having both on the same one on the front and on the back, just to make your life a little bit less complicated. Although I will mention that pretty much any pump that's made nowadays will have a universal nozzle that works for both types of valves without having to make any adjustments. They just work for both. So it's not the end of the world if you have two different types of valves, but for consistency, I recommend having one the same on front and back. Okay, so congratulations, we are about halfway there in the repair. So what I'm going to do is, as far as I know, this tube does not have a puncture. So I'm going to give it a puncture, unless it does have one. So what you're going to want to do, and regardless of whether it's a demonstration or in real life, you're going to want to put air into the inner tube to figure out where the air is leaking out, so that you can identify what the hole looks like, so you know what type of flat it is, and then obviously you can find it, and you can then repair it. So, as you can see, I have put on the nozzle. Here's something that's super important that so many people get wrong, is that for air to flow between the pump and the nozzle head and the valve, you have to have a tight seal. If air is leaking out or air is getting trapped inside of there, you're going to be pushing on the plunger of the pump, and air is not going to be passing through. Oftentimes that means that the pin that I mentioned earlier is not being engaged, and so air is just getting stuck. Nothing's going to happen. So it's really important when you're putting the nozzle on the valve to make sure that it's snug. You don't want to force it on so hard that you won't ever be able to remove it again, especially with Presta valves. But if your pump might be working perfectly fine, but if it's not snug enough to engage that pin, nothing's going to happen. So I would say try a few times with your pump. Really make sure it's on far enough before you decide to buy a new pump or think that something else is going wrong. It's really important that you do that. So,
did you unscrew that Presta valve?
I did, yep. So I also had to disengage the gasket here, unscrew the locking mechanism so that air can flow. If this was tightened down, air can't flow. With Presta valves, you have to disengage that. So this tool here, it's covered in something. This tool here is not necessary to fix a flat, but it is necessary to cause a flat on purpose for educational reasons. There are a few types of flats that cannot be patched, which we are going to do a patch for this lesson. Those include, unfortunately, one of the most common ones, which are pinch flats, which maybe you can patch. I'm sure someone out there, you have a cousin or whatever, yourself, who's patched a pinch flat. The reason why it's challenging is because you have two holes side by side. You can do a really long patch that covers both holes, but patching the tube is best done when it's one single puncture. If it's a tear or a blowout, forget about it. Buy a new tube. You'll save yourself some trouble. Don't pull out the needle and thread. If it's a pinch flat, maybe, but I would probably recommend replacing the tube. If it's a puncture and it's one hole, go for it. Patch the tube. It's more cost effective than buying a whole new tube. It's better for the environment. The one other thing is if you have a hole that's really close to the bottom of the valve, right where the stem comes out, that can also be really challenging to patch. So unfortunately, if you have even if it's a puncture, a prick, and it's right next to the valve stem, you might have some challenges to patch it. So that's something to keep in mind. And that comes into the next step of this process. So we've evaluated it. We understand we have a flat tire. We've disassembled. Now we're in the cases of this. It's I guess another evaluation stage to identify what type of flat you have. So I know what flat I am about to have because I'm going to do it to myself. I'm going to puncture it. So I've just punctured it, and it's a pretty small hole, but it's big enough that I can hear the air coming out. Sometimes this is a pretty, if I rolled over this on the road, I'm donezo. Sometimes you can roll over something that's really, really small, or it's cutting through your tire, but only the very, very tip of it penetrates your tube. Sometimes the hole is so small that it doesn't let enough air out that you can actually hear it coming out, but that doesn't mean you don't have a puncture. Sometimes what's called a slow leak is when the air comes out so slowly, it's not noticeable at first, but after a few hours have passed, then enough air has been released to notice it. So to identify a hole that small, a couple things you can do is put the tube really close to your face, close enough that your lips or your eyes or a sensitive part of your body will feel the air coming out, even if you can't hear it. If you've gone all the way around the tube and you still can't identify where the air is leaking out, you can submerge the inner tube in a bucket of water and look for air bubbles coming out. If you've done all of those things and you still can't hear it, but you feel really confident that you have a slow leak or a puncture, I would say just go ahead and replace the tube or risk it and continue riding on it. Maybe save that tube as a backup or a rainy day if you really need one. Tubes are about $7 if you come here and buy one, so not a huge investment if you have a couple extra tubes to have on you if you need to replace them. But for the sake of this video, we're going to actually patch this hole. So I neglected to bring with me a marker. Actually, there's one right behind me, conveniently. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so having a Sharpie is also something I haven't mentioned yet, but having some kind of a Sharpie if you're going to patch your hole is really useful because these tubes are black, and unless the hole is gigantic, which you're not going to patch it in that case anyway, it's super easy to forget where the tube is if you leave to go grab your patch kit or whatever, and you take your thumb off the hole and then put the tube somewhere. It's super easy to forget where the hole is. So it can be really handy to have a marker somewhere and mark where that hole is located. Hopefully you can see that so that you can keep track of it. All right, so we're on the third quarter of this process, which is the actual patch. So you've decided this is a patchable puncture. I'm not going to replace the tube. I'm going to be a cool mechanic today, and I'm going to actually do an awesome science project, which I'll explain why this is a science project in a second. And you're going to patch your tube. So this is a patch kit. There's all sorts of different kits. This is the Park Tool VP1. You can buy this here at our shop. I think they're like $6, something like that. So not super expensive. About the same cost of an inner tube. However, this particular box comes with multiple patches, so you get more repairs from one product. So what comes in the packaging, and there are instructions inside of here. If for some reason you forget everything I said, there are instructions inside this box, but it comes with a container of self-vulcanizing fluid. I'll explain what the hell that means in just a second. and it comes with different patches of different sizes. There's rectangular ones. If you hold them like this, it kind of looks like a face. We have these little circular ones, rectangular ones, for different sized holes. As I was mentioning before, the possibility of being able to patch a snake bite. If you have one shaped like this and the snake bite's really close together, maybe this one will do it. If it's a single puncture, this one's definitely going to do it. Here's larger diameter circular ones. And then finally, there's a piece of sandpaper. Why would you sand anything right now? That doesn't seem to make sense. But if you understand the process of adhering two objects to one another, providing some tooth to the surface that is being glued to is super valuable. What that means is by scoring this surface, and I'm going to do it in multiple directions, by scoring this surface, I'm adding texture to the tube, which is naturally a pretty slick surface. But by doing this, I'm giving it what's called tooth, meaning that the adhesive will stick to it more effectively because I'm scratching, and that glue can seep into those scratches on a cellular level and allow for a better bond, which hopefully after this process, I'll be able to use this tube for quite a while after having patched it. I have seen I've done flat fixes on bikes that already had 10 patches and I added the 11th. And if you patch it right, it might not last till the end of time, but you can certainly continue riding on a patch tube, even if there are multiple patches in multiple locations. But it's important to do this process correctly. And I'm crossing my fingers that this actually works, because it would be super embarrassing if I screw this up. But so doesn't take quite a bit of, not too much effort. Just do the sanding just for 10, 15 seconds, back and forth, side to side, all different angles. As you can see, hopefully I still have that ring that I marked. I still know that my puncture is right there. Now comes the vulcanizing fluid. So I have used both. I've said vulcanizing fluid. I've also said the word glue. The reason to understand that this is vulcanizing fluid and it's different is that this material will actually cause a chemical bonding reaction between the rubber patch, this guy, and the rubber tube. So this isn't like crazy glue that's going to be an adhesive that sticks them together. The vulcanizing fluid is actually going to heat these objects and chemically bond them to one another. So that's why if you do this correctly, it can actually last a long time, because they become, the patch and the inner tube become bonded to one another. Functionally, the way this works is you're going to apply the vulcanizing fluid. You want to kind of understand how big this patch is going to be, because when you apply the vulcanizing fluid, you want the circumference of that, you want the amount of fluid that you apply larger than the surface area of the patch. If you put vulcanizing fluid just right where that hole is, the edges of the patch will not become bonded where you have neglected to add vulcanizing fluid. And so what that means is the patch will end up peeling off and it won't hold air in. So it's important to apply vulcanizing fluid, which the brand new container is going to need to be, it's sealed right now, so I'm going to have to poke that open. So I was wrong when I said that this tool wasn't useful for fixing the flat, only for damaging the flat. If you have a brand new thing of vulcanizing fluid, which is really pungent, if you want a cheap high, no, don't do that.
I believe the end of the cap also has a little
that's
needle that you
you're
could poke.
so right. Thank you so much. I completely forgot that the cap comes with its own pokey. So you don't even need one of these fancy ones. If hopefully you can see that right there. There's a poker in the end of the cap, and that can be used to open up the fluid, open up the bottle. So yes, absolutely true. You don't need one of those. So I'm going to apply this. You don't need to really glob it on. Just a thin layer. but you do want an even coating all the way around, and really make sure, kind of spread the tube out. This might even be too much. I might be overdoing it a little bit. Not in the volume that I'm dispensing, but in the area that I'm distributing it. But that should be plenty. Why is this different from glue? Besides the chemical bonding that I mentioned earlier, when you're actually applying this, you have to wait for this to dry. The vulcanizing fluid, if it's not dry, if it's still tacky when you apply the patch, this is not going to work. So you have to wait. Curious to know if it tells you how long allowed to dry. So they don't say how long, but I would give it maybe at least 5 minutes, if not more. Feel free to wait longer. But no matter what, you need to make sure it dries. So blow on it, give it some air, and let that dry for a little bit. Let me see. All right. So it is 10 past 7. So I'm gonna. So in the interest of time, I am going to not wait 5 minutes. I didn't realize what time it was. So I'm just gonna fast forward through this super quick. Hopefully that's okay with everybody. I'm gonna just put the patch on right now. It might not work. Just know for yourself at home that it's important that you wait long enough. Even if it doesn't work, you'll still understand the process. So the patch has this aluminum foil backing. I'm going to peel that off. I'm then going to put the patch right where the hole was. At this point, it's kind of hard to tell because it's covered with the vulcanizing fluid, but I'm going to kind of guesstimate that it was right around here. I can already feel that the two are communing with one another. And then, so hopefully you let it dry. Then you're going to press the patch on, really give it some pressure. You don't have to wait too long. Really push it down and give it some force. Really make sure it's stuck. If you feel like the edges are peeling off, you might have to remove it, reapply more vulcanizing fluid, let it dry, and then reapply a new patch if it's not completely distributed. But more or less that should work. You'll notice that there's this plastic on the top here. Also, I'll mention really quickly, the top of the patch is the side that's black with this rubber colored ring around it. The bottom of the patch, I'm just going to take this one off to show you. So the bottom of the patch is the completely orange side. That's the part that engages with the tube. The top of the patch is the part that has black on it. So you should the contrast should only be from the ring there. You'll notice that there's also this plastic on it. You don't absolutely have to remove this plastic. You can actually leave it on if you want to, but you can peel it off. Wait until you're sure that the patch is secure. Don't peel it off if you're going to remove it. Don't peel it off from the edges. You'll actually see, hopefully, that when I pinch this together, there's a seam in the middle that allows me to pull it. If I'm dexterous enough, it allows me to pull it off from the middle out, which means it's less likely to peel the patch off. So again, I didn't wait super long, but that seems okay. I don't see any of the edges of the patch peeling off. So there's a chance that was enough to allow for the patch to hold. The moment of truth is when I inflate it and hopefully no air comes out. If air does come out, this is a no judgment zone. please go easy on me. I had to do this faster than I normally would. But now I have done my repair. I've done what I would call the adjustment phase of this sort of general process that I've been referencing. So this is the sort of repair phase or adjustment phase, and now I'm going to reevaluate to see if my work was fruitful. But don't be dismayed if it doesn't work. You can try to peel the patch off and try again. That's always an option. So, putting air in the inner tube, and that seems to be a successful patch. So, thank you very much. I am now going to quickly reinstall the tube into the tire, reinstall the bead of the tire onto the rim, reinstall the wheel back onto the frame, and then I'm happy to maybe for like 4 or 5 minutes quickly rapid fire answer some Q&A questions, and then I need to be elsewhere. So we can also continue this conversation via email or whatever your preferred platform of communication is. So
there's also that online chat feature, right?
Yes, we also have that online chat feature, right? So on our website, you can there's a direct chat function that we are now operating. So if you have a more general question and you'd like to email the shop, and we can communicate the more broader questions. If you have just a quick on-the-spot question, how do I buy a tube? How do I whatever, something that relating to the shop or the organization, we can communicate with you in a pretty timely fashion. All right, so you'll notice that I inflated my tube to check the patch, but I'm actually going to keep the tube inflated when I'm reinstalling it. This is super important. You want to make sure that you put at least just enough air, not too much, but just enough air that the tube holds its shape. If the tube is completely limp when you're installing it, the tube may end up becoming folded on itself, and you might not notice that. And then when you're all done and you're reinflating the tube and it's kind of folded like that, you may end up actually getting a pinch flat or a puncture because of that. So you want to make sure that the tube is going in evenly, and the best way to do that is that by actually putting a little bit air in first. I saved myself some time by not removing the tire all the way. But if you remember at the beginning, I started by removing the tire from the opposite side of the valve. Now we're going to do it in reverse, where I'm going to start with the valve, putting that through.
You already checked the tire for little bits of glass and all of that?
Yep. So if I wasn't sure, if I had identified what the hole was, and I felt, oh, it's probably a puncture, or even if it's a pinch flat, I still, at this point, use your imagination, I have completely checked the tire. I have an air compressor here. I might blow air through the tire to make sure any foreign bodies are gone. Yes, sound effects are appreciated. All right, so now I am going to work the tube all the way around the circumference of the tire. At the very end, you may find that even though you inflated the tube, you might get a little bit of bunching here. You might have to remove, eventually you will have to remove a little bit of air out of the inner tube to help alleviate that. You can actually see it's bunched up right there, and hopefully you saw that. I was able to just kind of fuss with it, and it evened itself out. So it's really important before you put the rest of the tire on to make sure the tube is not bunched even all the way around. So I let a little bit of air out, but there's still a bit more in there. I'm going to work my tube so that I know the tube is in the middle and not off to the side in this way. I am then, again, working in reverse, going to start with start where the valve is, and I'm going to start working the tire. Again, I didn't remove it, but if I had removed the tire, I'm still lining up the decal with the valve. I'm going to work with my right hand working clockwise, with my left hand working counterclockwise away from the valve until I get to the end. Now, I'm hoping that this tire doesn't give me too much resistance, but if any of you have ever repaired fixed a flat on your own, this might be the absolute worst part. Gator skins are notorious for being really tight tires. This one seems to be a little bit older and it doesn't seem to be fighting me as much. Some tires go on with no problem and some tires fight and fight and fight. My biggest pro tip to all of you is when you're reinstalling that last piece of the bead onto your rim, don't push with your thumbs. I see people doing that a lot where they're pushing with their thumbs. Contact the bead of the tire with the palm of your hand like this, not needing to use your thumbs at all, and then twist, wrap your hands around the rim, and that's going to give you more force, it's going to give you more leverage, and it's going to take pressure off of your thumbs and distribute it across your whole palm. And that should, if you put enough force into it. Something else you can do is put the tire against your waist and push like this and really get in there. And then hopefully, if you do it correctly, it'll pop back on and you're good to go. If you remember before, I mentioned the tire jack. This is a last resort tool, but the way this works is the stationary side of the tire jack goes on the opposite side of the rim like that. The swingy hook part goes on the side of the tire that you're trying to pull on, and then it basically allows you to wrench that piece over from the outside rather than having to stick a tire lever inside and risk puncturing your tube. So that's how that works. So I have now successfully reinstalled everything. The flat is repaired. Oftentimes, if you're struggling with that last little piece, make sure that all of the air is completely out of here. I still had a little bit in, and it still let me install it, but usually you really got to make sure that that's all the way out to get that last piece on. So now all that's left to do is reinstall the wheel on the frame.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Is it always possible to do it with just your hands, or will you sometimes need to use tire levers on that last part?
So I just realized that they may not be able to hear the question, but the question was, do you always have to get that last piece on with your hands, or can you use the tire levers? I would say 9 times out of 10, try to use your hands. Use the palm method if you really have to. Get leverage by doing it this way. And then the last resort is the tire jack. I would highly discourage you from using the tire lever. If you absolutely have to, it's the only thing that's going to allow you to get this tire on. If you have no other choice, you can use the tire lever. Just be aware that in using the tire lever to get it back on, you may cause damage, and then all of it's for nothing. So try to do it with your hands as best you can. So I'm now going to put the wheel back on my bike. You have the top and the bottom of the chain here. My brake is still disengaged. I'm going to put the gear cluster between the top and bottom of the chain so that the gears are in the middle. I'm going to line up the chain with that outermost gear that I have shifted into, push down on the derailleur so that moves out of the way, and then the wheel should pop right back up into the frame, which it has. And I'm going to then tighten down my quick release. I would then re-engage my brake. Make sure that my wheel is centered in the frame. When you're fixing a flat, it's really easy to take the wheel out, do the flat fix, and then when you're installing the wheel, install it crooked at an angle, not realized, and then you go for a ride and your wheel might be contacting your frame. So be cognizant of that when you're reinstalling the wheel, make sure that it's straight. This is a pretty new tire. When the casing for the rubber tire is molded, you'll see there's a seam all the way down the middle. You might not be able to see that, but there's a seam that comes from the molding of the tire. That means this tire has barely been ridden. That seam is the first thing that gets worn down on an old tire. If you line up that seam, or even if you don't have that seam, finding out where the middle of that tire is and lining that up with the sort of center axis of the bike. On this bike, you can see there's this drilled hole on the brake bridge here. That's dead center on the frame. If that center of your tread lines up with that center point on the frame, that's a really good way to know that your wheel is lined up. You can also look down here and make sure the rim is equidistant between the two sides of the frame down here, and then you're good to go. And then the only last thing to do is pump up the wheel up again and take it for a ride. So that was longer than I was expecting it to be, but I hope that it wasn't boring, and I hope that it was informative. I hope that all of you are still here and watching, and I'm not talking to a bunch of ghosts.
No way.
So thank you all so much for watching this. I hope that all of you are safe and at home and healthy. I hope that you have an opportunity to love your bicycle and to ride your bike as best as you can, following all the CDC guidelines. And I am happy to answer at least a couple questions. I am running late for my next thing, but you all are more important to me than my other obligations. So
shucks.
I'm happy to answer any questions if people have burning questions.
Yeah, we have one question. Good feedback. What do you think about tire liners or slime tubes to prevent flats?
Great question. Thank you. So personally, I have actually never used either of those products. I think that tire liners are perfectly fine. For those of you who don't know what those are, they're basically an extra piece of material that you can put between the inner tube and the tire. In the case of the tire liner, it's usually a plastic or something similar to a rim strip. In the case of the filler or the goo, whatever, it's a viscous material that absorbs punctures. I would say if you have access to that stuff, use it. I know that the goo filler can be a pain in the butt to put in. So if you are lazy like me, I would say the best way to avoid flat tires is to always make sure you have enough air in your tire, in your tube, making sure that you're topping it off to the pressure, which I forgot to mention. On the side of the tire, I pointed out the dimensions, the size. Feel free to look up the chart of all the tire sizes. You'll go insane at all the differences. But you should also see the recommended pressure. So this tire is a high pressure tire. Most likely it's going to be maximum somewhere around 100 to maybe 115 PSI. Again, highly recommend the pump with the gauge on it. So making sure you keep enough air in your tire, avoiding potholes as best as you can, although, life happens, and, same thing with glass. If you see a big patch on the glass on the ground, try to avoid it. And then the third thing is getting high quality tires. So there are commuter tires out there, like the Schwalbe tires, the Schwalbe Marathon Pluses. They're a little bit more expensive. If that's not in your budget, that's perfectly fine. But they're really great, and there are a lot of other brands, Panaracer, Michelin, Continental, that make tires that are designed for commuter riding. They're designed for many, many miles on rough urban terrain, and particularly with the Schwalbe tires, it's not the same like goop filler stuff, but they do have this sort of special proprietary filament material in the tread that is designed to absorb punctures. So that's a very roundabout way to tell you that I don't have much of an opinion on those products because I've never personally used them. I've been very fortunate that I don't get flats all that often, but the quality of the tire makes a huge difference. And then also just general maintenance things like air, and doing your best to avoid hazards in the road. If you want more information on other flat protection products, I'm sure there's 100 YouTube videos of people who have better information on that than I do. But thank you for your question.
Are there any other questions? I don't see any in the chat, so.
I have one. Can I put a 700C tire on a 27-inch wheel?
So our question from our very curious audience member is, can you put a 700C tire on a 27-inch wheel? Basically what that means is a 700C tire or rim, that is the diameter of the wheel, is a very standard size, particularly for road bikes. 27-inch is an antiquated size. A lot of bikes that we get still use 27, and you can still buy tubes and tires, but that is a larger diameter, the 27. Not to be confused with 27.5, which is something which is way smaller. Again, tire sizes don't make any sense at all whatsoever, but for simplicity, 27 is bigger than 700C. And so if your tire says 700 on it, 700C, aka 622, it will not fit on a rim that is designed, that is a 27-inch size. 27 is 630. That's the literal millimeter ISO diameter of your wheel, 630 millimeters, which is the old size. The new size, 622 millimeters, aka 700C. It's bonkers. But those tires will not be compatible with each other. But crucially, the inner tubes will work for both. So a 700C tire will not fit on a 27-inch rim. It will be the diameter will be too small. Vice versa, a 27-inch will be too big for a 700C rim. However, the inner tubes, as I mentioned at the beginning, have a range of widths. They also work for both 27 and 700C. They will expand enough to accommodate one or the other. So this particular tube I have here, this brand new one, says 25/622. That means it's 700, aka 622, by 25 to 630 by 32. 630 being the 27-inch size. So aka 27 by 1. So it works for both 700C and 27. You still have to match the width, but you can use, the tubes will be 700 and 27 for either of those tires, as long as the width is appropriate. I am more than happy. I am such a nerd about bikes that I would be more than happy in the future to do a whole hour dedicated just to understanding why the hell there's 300 different types of tires and they all contradict one another. So if that's something people are curious about, I would be more than happy to spend all day in the future doing a lesson just on that.
All right. Any closing thoughts?
Quick final question, real quick. What happens if I do all of this, I put my tire on, I'm so proud, I've got it, pump it up with air, and then the tire is rolled over into the rim a little bit, and I'm riding my bike and there's like a bumping noise or something, and I deflate the tube and then I inflate it again, it keeps happening. Is there any tricks that I could use, anything I could do?
So if you're asking if the tire isn't seating properly?
Is it seating properly?
Yeah.
If the seam isn't quite like snapping into the rim.
Yeah, so this will be my last question that I'll answer. That can actually totally happen. I sort of glossed over this, but I talked a lot about making sure that the inner tube is even all the way around the rim. You also want to make sure that the bead of the tire is seated evenly all the way across the rim. Most tires will have some sort of indicator. In this, it's more or less where this sort of Kevlar sidewall on the gator skin meets the black portion is where it's going to line up all the way around the rim. for whatever reason, sometimes there's a bubble in your inner tube because air is getting trapped somewhere. Maybe it's because the bead is damaged and it's exposed. Maybe sometimes even brand new tires, the molding process gets messed up and you get a defective tire and it's deformed. You may have a situation where the bead is not seated evenly all the way around the rim. And that can be a big problem when you don't notice it and then you go for a ride and you think you've done everything right and the tube is exposed because it's bursting through, or because the bead of the tire has slid off the rim, the hook of the rim, and it can cause a blowout. So I would say that's the kind of thing where first check your work. Myself, I've been a mechanic for over a decade, and we're all human, we all make mistakes, so double check your work. As you're inflating the tire, check periodically as you're inflating it. Put in 30 psi, 40, 60, 80, and as you're inflating it, just check and make sure that the tire is still on the rim. The last thing you want is to have it explode, especially if you're indoors. It happens here, not super often, but every once in a while it'll happen, and it echoes everywhere. And if you have a pre-existing heart condition, just be careful, because it's the loudest thing you'll ever hear. So be very aware of that, either whether it happens when you're out on the road or if it happens while you're inflating your tire. Check the sidewall, check the bead as you're inflating it. And on that note, now the final thing I'll mention before this is all done is if you have an old steel rim, which I know some of you may have if you bought a bike off Craigslist, or if it's the bike you've had that you grew up with. Newer rims, the sidewall of the rim is hooked so that it more efficiently and more snugly holds the tire onto the rim. Old steel wheels, and you can tell if it's steel or alloy with a magnet. The steels are going to be magnetic. The rim is going to be magnetic. The alloy ones will not be magnetic, although the spokes may still be steel spokes. And then you can look on the side and you can see whether it's hooked or whether it's flush. The older ones are going to be flush. If you put a brand new tire that says it goes up to 100 psi or 130 or whatever, but it's a wheel from the 60s or 70s or maybe even 80s that's steel and it has a flush profile, if you try to inflate that tube to 100 psi, you can almost guarantee it's going to explode. So if you identify with a magnet, or already that you have a steel rim with a flush profile on the sidewall, I would say maximum 50 psi. Even if it's a more modern tire that says otherwise, don't go over 55 psi, 55. So be careful with that. If it's an older wheel, don't overinflate it. All right. Thank you all so much for watching. I really hope that that was helpful to all of you. And Ben the Wrench Man signing off.